Hey, everybody, this is Mark Scott. Welcome to our next episode of the podcast. This one is called The Question, and we will get into that in just a minute. Real quick, let's just check in, see how everybody's doing with our spies check-in. Something spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, or social going on that you want to share. Does somebody else want to start? Putting you all on the spot right off the bat. Kaitlyn, go for it.
Sure. Okay. Social. Yeah, just been surrounded by lots of friends and family lately, so it's been really fun. I really enjoy just like that kind of quality time with everyone, and yeah, it's been good.
Awesome. Justine?
Mhm.
Yeah, I can go. I guess I'll pick emotional today, but I think just,
Uh,
um with the time off of work, been able to do a lot of I know this probably sounds cheesy, but like journaling and stuff, just stuff that I don't always get to do when I'm working all the time because it's go, go, go. So stuff like that. And then just getting to have good conversations and time with family and friends has also been good.
Sweet. That's very good. Mine's going to be emotional also. A little bit of a roller coaster. So I'm recovering from this foot surgery. By the time this recording airs, I should be well beyond where I am right now, which will be good. But there's something like it just kind of takes a mental toll on you. You know, like I'm dependent on other people for things and just like, so it's been a little weird. Like I'm really thankful for the progression, but I'm also really frustrated at the same time and wish it would move along faster. So that's kind of where I am. All right, we are going to jump in again. The episode is called The Question. The question that we're talking about today is a little bit different format because usually I would make a claim or an argument and then we kind of respond to those things. This one's a little bit different because we're going to build off of the previous episode, which was what is the best starting point for the Christian faith to start learning and talking about the Christian faith. I said that it was the question, who is Jesus to you? And so today we're going to unpack that question. We're just going to be real and raw here. Share whatever you feel comfortable sharing with this. We're going to look at this a few different ways as we go through it. Okay, who is Jesus to you? So we're just going to talk through that. I wonder, so I'm going to share just a word to get us started because like in your mind, is there a word or a phrase that comes to your mind right now in this stage of your life as far as what you think about Jesus? For me, the word is grace. That wouldn't come as a surprise to most of my family relatives. I talk about grace all the time, but to me, that is uh, ultimately what Jesus personifies and represents is that undeserved favor, just an unconditional love that comes through grace. So I will start with that. And I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't tell you I was going to ask you for a word or a phrase, but do either one of you have one?
Um, I think for me, maybe just patience, I think would be my.
mm, I would say loving. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. We're going to get to getting more in depth later. So it's harder to actually get it down to one word or phrase, really, right?
Yeah.
That's actually the harder thing to do. Okay, let's start by going back. Who was Jesus to you as a child? So we're talking about that age, like 0 to 10 kind of range as a child. What do you remember as far as your concept of Jesus in particular? What was that like? So I'll go first and say that I don't know that there was much of one, honestly. Like growing up as a child, we weren't, I had relatives that were in ministry and things. And so there were things that we were involved in with church here and there, but it was kind of periphery. It was like on the edges and stuff. I wasn't a lot of emphasis on Jesus when we came around to like this time of year, Christmas stuff. It was much more about the Santa Claus aspect of Christmas and things like that. So I don't know that I really had a great concept either way of what I believed about Jesus. Wasn't like hugely relevant to me as a child. How about you, Justine?
For me, so my family was very involved in the church. You know, going every Sunday, even like Awanas. I don't know if anyone will be familiar with that, but we were in that like even when we were 3 and 4, I think. So it was a lot, and like, you know, Bible stories before bed, like different things like that. So definitely a lot of exposure, I would say, as far as my, I guess, my view of him. I mean, I think as a child, I did view him as, you know, loving, a source of comfort, things like that. But um, obviously, there's only, you know, so much you can kind of, I guess, understand as a child about that. So a lot of it is just your kind of, you know, going to church and doing the things because your family is. Um, so I would say like when I was a young child, it would probably just that I did view him as, you know, loving and a comfort, and he was just a really core part of my family's life. So
Did you like the Bible stories, the verses, the things that you involved? Did you find those encouraging, comforting, like positive as a child?
yeah, yeah, I did as a child. Yeah.
Yeah, I would I'll piggyback off of Justine. I mean, that's pretty much how I was raised as well. Same kind of things in the Awanas, going to church every Sunday. Um, just involved in a lot of like church activities in general. I would say like when I was young, like little, so like 2, 3, 4 years old, I feel like I, you know, thought of God as just like loving. And I was kind of like almost like I had this very childlike, you know, idea of like what he was like, kind of like, oh, like all the positive things, like there's nothing bad, I guess, or anything that could be perceived as negative. But I think slightly before I became a Christian, which was also when I was still little, I was like 6 or 7, I think my view started to change just because of how I came to be a believer, if that makes sense. Like during that process, it was not like positive feelings, it was a lot of like negative feelings, I think, about like who Jesus was. So, yeah, a little complex.
Was that fear related? Like, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay,
a lot of fear, yeah. Mhm.
okay. I will let you unpack any of that or none of that as we go on through the discussion. So whatever people say, we're just going to kind of leave it at that. I won't probe too much into questions as we go along. Let's go into the kind of teenage years. So who was Jesus to you as a teenager? And that can be kind of an up and down roller coaster. Again, I'll get started here. This is very interesting for me. So my parents divorced when I was like in 5th grade, and it was kind of a long, icky process. And so going into middle school, one of the things my mom did, we had some family friends that were very involved in a local Catholic church. And so I think to provide some stability and, um, you know, some moral teaching, my mom decided that we would join them and start participating in the Catholic Church and stuff. So in my middle school years, I went through the whole thing. I, you know, like confirmation, my first confession, baptism, I became an altar boy, did like all of that for about 2 years. It was completely, totally me going through the motions. Like none of it had any deep impact on me. I just felt like I was supposed to do these things, and I was told that I was supposed to do those things. Then I kind of just in my teenage years had my own like anger and stuff towards everything that happened with my parents. And so that was kind of going into high school. Then I met Nanette, who is now my wife, Kaitlyn's aunt. And she introduced me to her parents, her family, the church that they were involved in, and I got very, very involved in that. Full transparency, totally got involved just to win the girl kind of thing. Did not care about the teachings initially and all of those things. So still, I was curious, very curious, learned a lot. But Jesus, as far as the answer to the question, who was Jesus to me, still kind of this like, okay, somebody that they're talking about. I don't really know that much. I don't even really care to know that much. And then everything changed and kind of got turned on its head when I was 19. And I would have what we would all call, like in the evangelical world, like a conversion experience. And it was as real. I mean, it's as real to me now as it was then. So I don't, even though I'm kind of critical of hearing people's stories about those stories, I can definitely say it was something that I really experienced, and everything changed, like everything. So Jesus just like became my obsession, kind of in my late teenage years. So that's a little of my journey, my answer to that question. All right, so Justine, what was it like for you, your teenage years? Who was Jesus to you?
So I would say I think one of the biggest turning points was when I was about 10 years old. I think I said this, I don't know if I said this last episode, but a lot of my, I guess, story, my mental health intersects a lot with my spiritual health and my experience with faith, as I know it does for a lot of people. And so when I was 10, it was a turning point because I was having it was physical health issues at the time. And it was just a lot of going to doctors and no answers. It was just very scary because, yeah, not knowing what's happening to your body and not sure what's gonna happen. Um, but faith and church and Jesus were still a really big part of my family's life. And so it was still a really big part of my life. And it definitely was something, I still did see Jesus during this time as someone who cared and loved me and, wanted me to get better. And all those different types of things. And then I would say teenage years. So I guess going into middle school and then high school, I struggled a lot more with my mental health. And so that was, another time where I think my response, because I was raised in the church and we were always so heavily involved with it. I think my first response when I was struggling mentally or physically was always to turn to that. Um, and so yeah, I mean, and I would say in high school, it kind of like it amped up even more. I was more involved in church. I was doing more things. I um I would say that Jesus definitely was my identity. Like that's what I would have considered him to be at the time.
Thank you for sharing that, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, so I would say my teenage years, a lot of it was just going through the motions. Um, I don't really remember any specific time where I was truly like praying or really even thinking about God, to be quite honest. Because for me, my childhood, I want to say once I was about 9 or 10, it just became very like tumultuous. And there were just a lot of things going on in my family that for me personally, and because my family was also very super religious, I think some people might think, oh, if you have a very tumultuous family life, then you might turn to God. But I think for me, it was the opposite. I think I kind of turned inward on myself a lot, and I kind of was more antisocial. I was more like alone, doing things by myself, honestly going into like my own world a lot. Like I would just be out and about doing my own thing all the time, kind of like by myself. I think to get away from all the chaos that was my home life. But I think a lot of it also had to do with like I have an older sibling who was struggling a lot with her mental health and her well-being. And so it was just a lot of like attention being put on her. But then unfortunately with that, I feel like the other, like me and like my other sibling were kind of neglected in a bit, like in a sense, like there was just a lot going on with that 24/7. And so, and like she kind of was like, kind of like what Justine was saying, like she turned to religion, I think, when she was struggling with all of her mental health. And she was like very religious. Like she would be up at night, like rereading scriptures, like almost like compulsively. So it is interesting, the dynamic, I think, between me and my siblings, because I definitely saw, one of us being extremely religious in our teenage years. And then it was like, for me, I felt like I was very disconnected from that. And then I want to say my younger sibling, honestly, I think he was also kind of maybe just going through the motions. But to be quite honest, I think just because of our whole dynamic, we were all kind of separated in a way. To where it was like, because of like what each of us were kind of dealing with, I guess, at the time. But yeah, for me, I would just say overall, like I did not feel connected at all with God. I think I was very much just like, yeah, kind of going through the motions, kind of doing what I was told to do. And a lot of it was like forced, like with like religion and everything. So it was not like the greatest like example, I guess, of what that looks like in a healthy way. So yeah, it's kind of my my thoughts there.
All right. All right.
Mm.
So, where are you two now in terms of what has changed between then and where you are now in your answer to that question of who is Jesus to you, and what's changed about how you would answer that question?
I think for me, so I have at this point in my life fully stepped away from the church. I was going when I was in college, living in a different city. I was still going, all throughout my early 20s. And then when I moved back home at 23, I think I was 23, or about to be 23, that was kind of when, oh, well, that's not true. Actually, it was my last year of college. So at about age 22 that I decided to just kind of fully step away from it. A lot of things led up to that, which that would be like too long to explain everything, but I would say the biggest thing that led to it again was my struggle with mental health. And just for the sake of being, very transparent, I have been diagnosed with OCD. And so that if I ever were to tell my full story, like that's a lot of, like Kaitlyn was saying about her sister, looking back, a lot of my reaction to hardship, and I think the way that I view Jesus, the way that I viewed the church, it did have a lot to do with that I felt like I had to do these certain things, that I felt like I was constantly striving for perfection, that I felt like I didn't really actually fit in, but also this was all I ever really knew. And it was bringing at least a little bit of comfort, so I'm just going to keep doing it. It was also, how I had all my friends and my community and my family was always a part of it. And so I think that, but I think when I was away at college and I was kind of able to, because I got that OCD diagnosis when I was about 21. And so then when that happened, that's when things really started to click for me. I think also just, and I think, you know, a lot of people might kind of say this as part of our generation, because I know that, you know, some of my friends in college experienced it, but also COVID, I think, just played a huge role in just everything that kind of, just the political climate, that just like a lot of different things, I think definitely shifted the way I saw the church. And honestly, even how I saw Jesus, and really made me start to deconstruct and kind of look at, you know, do I actually believe this? Is this actually true? Is this actually, you know, how I want to live my life? Or are these the values that I want to be led by? And yeah, so I would say now, who he is to me now, I mean, I don't know. I think honestly, and me and Kaitlyn, you know, have talked about this, but I would say that honestly, at this point, it's more just spirituality. I think that you know, I do believe in a higher power. What that looks like, I don't really have answers for that right now, but I do know that for me, one of the biggest parts of why I stepped away from the church, and one of the reasons that I am glad that I did and helped me heal, you know, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, was breaking free from that all or nothing thinking. Because especially with OCD, it's so, like, that's all it is. It's so all or nothing. It's so black and white. It's just, and I needed to get away from that, because I was, you know, being told these things that the church was saying were so simple. You know, if you're praying, if you're in a small group, if you're reading the Bible every day, if you're doing all these things, like, you shouldn't be struggling mentally anymore. But that wasn't happening for me. And I also don't think that that's how it works. And I think, you know, just to get back to like the core of why we're doing this, I think that's also a big reason why these conversations are so important to me, because that was a really difficult time in my life. And I do just want people to know, whether they're in the church or not in the church, or, you know, whatever that looks like for them right now, but they are struggling with their mental health. Just that it's not, you know, two things can be true, multiple things can be true at once. And so I think that's just really important to me, and did also, I think, help me open my mind more to who Jesus is to me now. And also that just being aware of the way that the church, I think, sometimes will spin things that may not be accurate to who Jesus actually is. So I think that was also really important for me to kind of decide for myself and dive into that on my own.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Kaitlyn, before you go. And I just think that there was a sentence there that you said about multiple things can be true at the same time. I think that's really important. And I think that's a big part of a lot of people's deconstruction journey. Is it seems like a lot of people I talk to went through a teaching or an indoctrination that basically negated that. That's like, no, it's only one way of seeing a certain thing. And so I think that's a really interesting point. I also just wanted to say that in a future episode coming up, we're going to get more into the relationship between mental health and religion, kind of broadly, but even more specifically, narrow the focus into our kind of our feelings about prayer and mental health. And, you know, when is prayer healthy? When is prayer unhealthy? When is it like people telling you to just kind of pray it away, you know, like whatever it is, that issue. So great. Kaitlyn.
Well, first of all, I want to say I commend you, Justine, for sharing that. It's very helpful for anyone who is listening. Yeah, okay. Sorry, let me get into my yeah, I mean, I will say for my adult years, with just faith, I mean, yeah, I pretty much the same with Justine. Like, I am not involved in church. I don't really see myself ever stepping into a church again, to be quite honest, like going like regularly, right? It's one thing if it's like, oh, just like for a Christmas annual thing, you go with like family. But for me, I do think that I've just always viewed faith and just my beliefs as something very, very simple. I don't I don't agree or believe in a lot of the things that I feel like the Bible will teach or that the church will teach is like what's considered right and what's considered wrong. Um, so I've always just been able to like narrow it down at this point, I think. For me personally, I am more spiritual than anything. And that's kind of how I view God. But I think my biggest thing with it is that I just kind of like I believe in God, and I think that the God that I have a relationship with or that I feel like I'm connected to is someone who is all loving. And that's kind of just that. Like, I just don't really believe in like all the other things that go into that. Like, oh, well, he's only loving if you do this, or he's only this if you do this. Like, I don't really like to view God as like someone who, might be controlling or, it's this, it's like almost like this, like my way or the highway kind of situation. So I think for me, I've just been able to simplify it a bit. And that's what's healthy for me. And that's where I feel like my belief in God is at. But other than that, I mean, I don't do much outside of that, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Okay, great. So quick question to kind of play devil's advocate here for a second. People listening to this, with each one of us, are going to hear us share our journey, our story, and how we answered the question, who is Jesus to us? And the answer really had to do with a lot with us. Like, well, this is what I was going through, or this is what somebody else taught me, or this is what people told me I needed to do. So if somebody's listening to this and they're going, well, yeah, that's just because you had some negative experiences. Like, so yeah, who is Jesus to you? Your answer is completely dependent upon you. Like, you're looking at it through your lens. Somebody else could be going through a different life. And so Jesus is much more comforting to them, uh, much more assuring, things like that. So what would your response be to people just saying, well, now we can't all just be subjective. Like, we're all walking through life saying, well, we're looking at it through our lens. Jesus has to be something consistent, or maybe not. Your response might be, no, he doesn't. So what would your response be? Does my question make sense? Like, what would your response be to that objection, to just say, well, everybody's defining Jesus on their own terms and we can't do that?
I mean, I think I would say to that question, to kind of go back to what you said last episode, I think that it is a relationship. So I think it will always have at least something to do with what we're going through. I mean, I think I would respond to that though, is that, you know, yeah, like, if there is a higher power, and I think that, there is, I think for me, it has stayed constant because of the ways that I have, I guess, been provided for, or the ways that I have gotten help for myself, or the ways that I have continue to see like goodness and kindness in the world. Like, that's kind of how I view it. And I do think that I always will find, you know, some sort of comfort in the gospel itself. But I think that, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that response made sense. I guess that is difficult though, because yeah, I know, and I know a lot of people will say that to, you know, people who are deconstructing or who have deconstructed, is like, well, that's just because you had negative experiences in the church. But I can't quite verbalize it right now, but it's not just that. It's there's a lot more to it than that. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, and just anyone who's listening can just know that if that's you, I do understand and see that, because it is more. It's just difficult to explain. I think it's also difficult to explain to people who are still so involved in the church. I know there's also like arguments that, oh, well, then you must never have been a true believer. And I don't think that's true either. I think that I do believe that the things I experienced were real. I just think that because of things that happened, and, you know, I think that I had to take a step back and, you know, really look at those beliefs and decide if that's how I wanted to continue to live my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. That's totally fair. Kaitlyn, you want to add anything?
Um, yeah, I would say like, I can understand their point of view, and I can respect their point of view on that. And but yeah, I think it does kind of go back to what Justine is saying, is that like I think the people who sometimes do come about it in that way, or who kind of say, oh, well, that's just because you had a negative experience. I feel like sometimes that in itself can be a very problematic statement, because it could also come across as like dismissive almost to people who have experienced something negative, as if to say like, oh, well, that's only because you saw it that way. So I don't know, sometimes it almost feels like when people say stuff like that, they're not really willing to hear or listen to why that could be the case. They're just trying to sit there and say, well, but you need to think of my way of like how I see it almost. Instead of just like maybe stepping back and being like, oh, well, like I want to hear like what happened, and like how you came about like with your faith in this way. And honestly, this is kind of like even like more of this goes into like something bigger, but I think too, just the idea of like when people get like people who are in the church, right? When they get defensive of people, like they'll be like, oh, well, you're generalizing, or, oh, well, you're saying this about all Christians, or this or that, or whatever. I think sometimes they might think that might be the right thing to say. But honestly, I think in order to try to help change people's views, if you do feel like they're generalizing, I feel like the best way to maybe like change someone's mind, or to get them to see something in a different way, is to listen, and to let them know that like you want to hear what went on with them to get to them to that place, because then they kind of are also able to view you as like, oh, so you're not just like everybody else in the church, or like, oh, you're not just like those, like, like the Christians that I've seen that are bad. Does that make sense? Like, does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was like, oh
Sorry.
no.
Sorry, I had
No,
to
I'm losing
unmute.
y'all.
Yeah.
Like, oh no.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I would encourage people sometimes to maybe take that stance. Because I think whether people realize it or not, there are a lot of situations that they might think that what they're saying is like a helpful statement, but really it could come across as like very dismissive, or just trying to, I don't know, like prove that someone's wrong, or, and I think the biggest thing that all of us could learn from is just sitting and listening to people, and
Mhm.
also being able to validate people's experiences, whether they agree with it or not, or they whatever. I think those are the kind of conversations that can open up just so many more things. And you could also find some sort of like, what's the word? Like common ground, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's well said, because I think
Mhm.
the idea of listening is underrated as a very effective tool to communicate with people and to deepen understanding. It seems very basic, but we all kind of forget about it at times, and we get caught up in our own things. So I think what we'll do for the sake of time is, because I think we could go on forever with this discussion, and in the future episodes, we'll have to unpack little parts of this that came up in this episode. But for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap a bow on this and bring it to a close. So to those of you listening or watching, some of these questions that we were talking about today: who was Jesus to you as a child? Who was Jesus to you as a teenager going through that time of life, and then into your adulthood, and what kind of changed over time? We would love to hear your thoughts, your answers, your responses to those questions. And if there was any one of those questions that is particularly harder or easier to answer than one of the others, I'd be curious about that as well. I do want to plug a few things here, promote a couple of things. So I have a course called Simplify the Path, which has some podcast episodes and resources on it. One of them, lesson 3, is about this idea of the most important question. And lesson 4 is what I call the 411 on Jesus, where you go into the New Testament with a kind of a different angle, a different perspective to figure out who Jesus is. Because I think that's a big issue, is the way we were taught about Jesus to begin with, and people use the Bible to do it, but this cherry picking of verses, or pulling verses out of context to create a doctrine of who God is, I think can be very harmful and dangerous. And so I think there's a healthier way to do that, and then you can choose really to take it or leave it on its terms. But I don't think we come to the Bible very much on its terms. We come on our terms and approach it a certain way. And then there's an example where I use an example from the book of Colossians that I share in lesson 5 of that course. So that's all on Substack. I'll have links to everything in the notes. The book I wrote, chapter 7, is all about this issue, this topic that we've been discussing here as we've gone through this as well. I want to say thank you to both Kaitlyn and Justine. I very much appreciate you being willing to share, being transparent, and getting into all of this. And we will continue to do so in some future episodes that may unpack some even bigger issues for us.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Of course.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.